The transport ship landed with a soft hum, and Ethan Wells stepped out carrying one old backpack and a small box marked Earth. He was one of the first humans accepted into the Galactic Cultural Exchange Program. The dormitory smelled strange, something between metal and flowers. The corridors shimmered with light that came from no visible source. He looked around, nervous but excited. He was told he would share a room with someone from another world, someone who studied human behavior. He smiled at the thought. Maybe it would be fun. Maybe he would make a new friend. When he reached the door labeled D47, he paused for a moment. The translator chip in his ear clicked as it connected. The door slid open with a whisper and he saw her. She stood in the middle of the room, tall and calm, with silver gray eyes and pale skin that looked almost like polished stone. Her hair was soft and white, falling straight down her back. She wore a simple uniform and held a small tablet. For a second, both of them just stared at each other in silence. "You are the human," she said in a clear, calm voice. Ethan blinked. Yeah. And you're my roommate?" "I am Lyra of the Alreen Collective," she said. "I will share this room. I hope this arrangement will not disrupt your human comfort." Her tone was polite but empty, like a machine reading a message. Ethan smiled awkwardly. "No problem. I'm used to weird roommates. At least you don't snore, right?" She tilted her head slightly as if trying to understand the joke. "Snore? Never mind," Ethan said, dropping his bag on the floor. "It's just a human thing." Lyra watched as he unpacked. She observed how he folded his clothes, how he arranged his pictures, especially one small photo of his family back on Earth. "You carry visual memories," she said softly. "Do humans require them to feel stable?" He looked up at her, surprised. "I guess so. Helps me remember where I came from." "Curious," she murmured. "We store memories in collective archives. Emotion is unnecessary for recall." Ethan chuckled. "Well, for us, memories feel better when there's emotion in them. It makes them alive." She didn't respond. Instead, she sat at her desk and began typing on her tablet, her long fingers moving with precision. Ethan leaned over to look, but she turned the screen slightly away. "Field notes," she said. "I must record initial interaction. Human shows frequent use of humor, eye contact, and physical expression." He laughed. "Are you studying me right now?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "It is my assignment, to understand human social behavior." "Great," Ethan said with a grin. "Guess I'm your homework." That night they ate together for the first time. The cafeteria was filled with aliens of every kind, some with feathers, some with scales, and some that looked like walking trees. Ethan tried not to stare, but Lyra didn't seem to notice the strange sights. She sat upright, eating slowly, watching how he handled his food. "You use hands often," she observed. "Well, yeah. That's how we eat sandwiches." "Unsanitary," she said calmly. "Delicious," he replied, and she gave him a puzzled look that made him laugh again. Back in their dorm, Lyra began arranging her side of the room with geometric precision. Every item had an exact place. Her bed was perfectly aligned with the wall. Ethan's side, in contrast, was a mess of books and clothes. She looked at it once and sighed softly. Humans appear comfortable in disorder. "Exactly," Ethan said, lying on his bed. "It's called organized chaos. You should try it." She didn't answer, but later that night she quietly moved one of her data chips out of line, just a tiny bit, and stared at it for several minutes. The feeling it gave her was new, strange, and not entirely unpleasant. As the lights dimmed automatically, Ethan spoke into the quiet. "So, Lyra, why did you join this program?" She hesitated. "My world believes emotion is a barrier to progress. The council sent me to study how humans function with so much feeling. My task is to understand, not to participate." He smiled in the dark. "Well, good luck with that. Humans are complicated. We laugh when we're sad, cry when we're happy, and sometimes both at the same time." "I will note that," she said softly. A few minutes later, he heard her voice again, quieter this time. "Ethan, yeah? Why do you smile when you speak to me?" He thought for a moment. "Because I like talking to people. It makes things warmer." "Warm," she repeated. "An emotional description." "Yeah," he said with a yawn. "You'll get used to it." Lyra lay awake long after he fell asleep. She listened to his steady breathing, watched the faint rise and fall of his chest. Her mind told her it was meaningless data, but something in her chest felt heavy and unfamiliar. She placed a hand over her heart and felt it beat faster. Strange, she whispered to herself. Human presence affects pulse rhythm. She recorded the observation but didn't know what it meant. In the morning, Ethan woke to find a cup on his desk. It was filled with a pale blue drink that smelled sweet. A small note rested beside it. Experiment. Reaction to Alrene nutritional supplement. He smiled, lifted the cup, and took a sip. Not bad, he said. Lyra watched carefully. You do not fear unknown substances? Not from a friend, he said casually. Friend, she repeated. The word lingered in her mind like an echo. As he left for class, she stood by the window watching him walk away. The sunrise turned the metal halls golden. She didn't understand why she kept staring. All she knew was that her first human interaction had gone beyond the limits of research. It had left something unmeasurable in her, a spark, small but real, that she couldn't explain or record. Days passed, and the strange friendship between Ethan and Lyra began to take shape in quiet, unexpected ways. The first time Ethan played music from his old Earth tablet, Lyra had nearly dropped her stylus. The sound confused her. It wasn't speech, it wasn't data, it was something alive. The song was soft, warm, and full of emotion. She listened without blinking, her silver eyes wide. Ethan smiled when he saw her reaction. It's called music, he explained. Humans use it to feel things we can't always explain. Lyra tilted her head, studying the rhythm. The sound patterns are irregular, yet they resonate. That's the point, Ethan said with a grin. Sometimes life isn't supposed to be perfect. After that, she asked to hear more. Each evening, while Ethan worked on his engineering notes, Lyra would sit cross-legged near his desk, listening to old songs from Earth, slow ones, bright ones, even silly ones. She tried to analyze the emotion behind every note, but the longer she listened, the less she wanted to analyze. Sometimes she would hum softly without realizing it, and Ethan would glance at her, smiling but saying nothing. One day, she brought something from her own world, a small crystal sphere that floated between her hands. When she touched it, it released a glowing vibration like a hum. This is Alrene harmonic communication, she said. It carries emotion through energy. Ethan watched in awe as the light pulsed in sync with her heartbeat. It's beautiful. It is not beauty, she corrected automatically, then paused. But perhaps it feels that way to you. He nodded. It does. The two of them began to exchange lessons. Ethan taught her about human traditions, how people told stories to connect with others, how they shared jokes to show comfort, how even small gestures like a smile or a handshake carried meaning. Lyra in return showed him how her people used silent gestures to express thoughtfulness, how emotion could be hidden, yet still powerful. Slowly, their communication found a rhythm that belonged only to them. One afternoon, Ethan found Lyra sitting by the window, staring at the rain outside the dome. She looked lost in thought. You okay? He asked. She didn't answer right away. The weather system simulation is curious, she said softly. Water falling from the sky. Your species seems to find it calming, he smiled. Yeah, rain makes us think. It reminds us of home. Home, she repeated quietly. A place of emotional attachment. My world does not use the concept. We live where needed, but humans, they belong to somewhere. Ethan nodded. Everyone belongs somewhere. Sometimes it's not a place, it's people. That made her look at him for a long moment. Something in his words stayed with her even after he left for class. Later that night, while they shared a meal, Lyra observed Ethan's face carefully. You speak of people like they are part of your core. Why, because they are, he replied. When we care about someone, they become a part of us. That's love, friendship, family, it's all connection. Connection, she repeated. A merging of emotional patterns. Yeah, you could say that. Lyra nodded thoughtfully, but her heart was unsettled. She was beginning to understand feelings she couldn't name. When Ethan laughed, something fluttered inside her chest. When he looked tired, she felt an urge to help. It wasn't logic. It was something softer, heavier, and warm. During one of her classes, her professor assigned a project about cross-species empathy. Each student had to record real emotional interactions with a being from another world. When her turn came, Lyra raised her hand. I will use my human roommate, she said. The class turned to look at her with mild surprise, but the professor only nodded. Very well, Lyra. Your assignment: document genuine emotional exchange. Record, analyze, and report. That evening, Lyra told Ethan about the project. He nearly choked on his drink. Wait, you're going to study me again? Yes, she said simply. But this time the task requires emotional participation. He raised an eyebrow. Emotional participation? That sounds complicated. It is, she admitted, but I must learn what empathy feels like. Ethan thought for a moment, then nodded. All right, Professor. Let's do it your way. Where do we start? She hesitated. We begin with shared activity, something humans do to form emotional bonds. He smiled. Easy. Movie night. The next evening, they sat side by side in front of a small screen. Ethan chose an old Earth movie about friendship and sacrifice. Lyra watched in silence, her eyes wide as scenes of laughter and sadness filled the room. When one of the characters cried, she turned to Ethan and whispered, "Why is he producing water from his eyes?" "He's crying," Ethan said softly. "It happens when we feel too much sadness, love, or loss. Does it help?" "Sometimes," he said. "It's a way of letting emotions out instead of keeping them locked inside." Lyra turned back to the screen, her heart beating strangely fast. Near the end of the movie, she found herself feeling heavy, as if something inside her chest was responding to the story. When the credits rolled, she didn't speak for a long time. Finally, she asked, "If this is empathy—" "It hurts," Ethan looked at her gently. "Yeah, but it's also what makes us human." She placed a hand over her heart. "It feels wrong and right at the same time." "That's how you know it's real," he said quietly. The following days, Lyra's report filled with notes she couldn't understand. Her heart rate changed around Ethan. Her focus wavered when he smiled. She began avoiding direct eye contact, though she didn't know why. When he accidentally brushed her hand one morning, she froze, not from fear, but from something else entirely. Something that made her cheeks warm and her breath quicken. That night, as she wrote her report, she stopped halfway and stared at the screen. Her own words felt foreign now. The subject displays consistent empathy, she had typed. Emotional resonance increasing. She deleted the line, sighed, and whispered to herself, "I am not supposed to feel." But deep down, she already knew. Whatever this was, it wasn't just study anymore. It was something her people had forgotten how to feel, something purely human and dangerously beautiful. The morning began like any other, but something in the air felt different. Lyra sat at her desk, her tablet open, eyes scanning the assignment notice that had just arrived from the Research Council. The words glowed in calm blue letters. Phase 2, Emotional Immersion Test. Subject, Human Participant Required. Her hands trembled slightly, though she didn't understand why. The task was simple. Observe and experience emotional affection through daily interaction. It was meant to be science, nothing more. Yet when she thought of who she would choose, her mind didn't even pause. It was Ethan. When Ethan returned from class, she stood waiting by the door. "Ethan," she said quickly, "I need your cooperation for my next study." He grinned. "Let me guess, another empathy project?" "This one is different," she replied. "It is called a simulation of affection. The test requires me to act as if I share emotional closeness with a human subject for 7 days. Ethan raised his eyebrows. "You mean like pretend to like someone?" "Yes," she said plainly. "It is artificial. For data." He chuckled awkwardly. "Well, I don't know if I'm good at being a lab rat, but sure." "Why not?" Lyra blinked. "You accept?" He nodded. "I trust you." Her pulse quickened at those words. Trust. No one had ever said that to her before. On her world, trust wasn't emotional, it was assigned. But here it felt heavy and warm. That evening marked the start of the experiment. Lyra prepared a shared dinner as the protocol described. She had researched human comfort foods and tried to recreate them using alien ingredients. The result was strange. The color was wrong, the smell unusual, but Ethan still smiled when he saw the effort. "You made this for me?" he asked. "Yes," she said, trying to sound detached. "It is part of the process." "Well, process or not," he said with a grin, "it's nice." "Thanks, Lyra." They sat together, eating quietly. She watched the way he smiled, how he chewed slowly, how his eyes softened whenever he spoke kindly. Every detail became a note in her report, but the more she wrote, the less it felt like observation. It felt like memory. The next day, they took a walk around the campus dome. The artificial sunlight bathed everything in a soft golden glow. Lyra noticed the way Ethan greeted others, his natural warmth spreading like sunlight itself. She couldn't understand how he could smile so easily, even to strangers. Humans waste much energy on unnecessary kindness, she said curiously. He looked at her and laughed. Maybe, but it makes the world nicer, don't you think? She thought for a long time before answering. It makes something inside me lighter. As the week continued, the experiment deepened. Each day required closer interaction, shared activities, emotional storytelling, and verbal affirmation. Lyra followed the guide carefully at first, repeating phrases she learned. I appreciate your company. I enjoy spending time with you. But as she spoke them, she began to mean them. She began to wait for his smile, his laugh, his voice calling her name. One evening, they sat beneath the transparent dome where stars shimmered above. Ethan leaned back and said, You know, I used to dream about seeing the stars from another planet. I didn't think I'd have company this good, though. Lyra turned her gaze toward him. Why do you say such things? Compliments, are they necessary for human bonding? He looked at her softly. No, I say it because it's true. Her breath caught. For a moment, she forgot she was part of an experiment. She felt her chest tighten, her heart race. The warmth she had called data now burned brighter. She lowered her eyes. This reaction, it is unexpected, Ethan smiled gently. Not everything can be explained, Lyra. Sometimes you just feel. The next day, she struggled to concentrate in class. Every time her instructor spoke about emotional boundaries, her thoughts drifted to Ethan's voice, his laugh, his presence. When the teacher asked her to define empathy, she answered without thinking, It is when another person's happiness becomes your own. The class fell silent. The instructor wrote down her response. Interesting, he said. But be careful, Lyra. Empathy can become attachment. That word, attachment, stayed in her mind long after. That night, she tried to act normal. She sat across from Ethan, typing notes while he fixed a small device on his desk. But then she noticed his hand was bleeding slightly from a tool slip. Her body reacted before her mind could think. She reached out and grabbed his hand. You are hurt. He looked at her in surprise. It's just a small cut. Still, she said softly, you should not ignore pain. Her fingers pressed gently against his skin to stop the bleeding. He looked at her hand, then at her face. You care, don't you? She froze. The words made her heart race. It is part of the observation, she said quickly. He smiled knowingly. Sure, observation. Her cheeks warmed. For the rest of the night, she couldn't focus. Every sound of his voice lingered in her ears. Every smile felt like sunlight she couldn't turn away from. On the 6th day, she stopped recording data entirely. Her tablet lay forgotten while she and Ethan cooked together, laughed over burnt bread, and shared stories about Earth and Alreen. When he told her about missing his family, she felt her chest tighten again, not from confusion, but from something deeper, something almost like longing. Later, when he went to bed, she whispered to herself, This is no longer science. On the final day of the experiment, she submitted her report. The opening line was supposed to read, Subject displays affection response to controlled simulation. Instead, her fingers typed, Subject displays affection, and researcher cannot remain unaffected. She stared at the sentence for a long time, unable to erase it. When Ethan entered the room, she quickly closed the file. He smiled and asked, So what's the result? She looked at him quietly. I do not know yet, he chuckled. Maybe love isn't something you test, Lyra. Maybe it's something you live. She didn't reply. She just looked at him. And in her silver eyes, for the first time, there was no calculation, only light, trembling softly like the first spark of something real. Lyra woke early, long before the artificial sun rose over the academy dome. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the air system and the slow rhythm of Ethan's breathing from across the room. She sat on her bed holding her tablet close, staring at the words she had written the night before. Every line looked wrong now. It wasn't science anymore. It was confession. The report was supposed to show controlled affection, measurable empathy, and emotional imitation. But what she had felt was not imitation. It was real, and that frightened her more than any experiment ever had. She turned her gaze toward Ethan. He slept peacefully, one arm under his head, the other draped over the blanket. His expression was calm, open, human. She wondered why looking at him made her chest ache and her thoughts scatter. Her people didn't experience such things. To them, feelings were distractions. To her now, they were storms she didn't know how to control. When Ethan finally stirred, he smiled sleepily. "You've been awake long?" "Yes," she said quietly. "I was thinking." "That's dangerous," he teased, rubbing his eyes. "You might start acting human." She tried to smile, but it didn't come easily. "Perhaps I already am." He looked at her curiously, but before he could ask, she stood and began preparing her things. "I must go. The instructors requested all students to attend the empathy review today." "Good luck," Ethan said. "Want me to come?" She shook her head. "No, this test is only for Alreen participants." When she left the dorm, her chest felt heavy. In the hall, the others whispered quietly about her. Everyone knew her experiment had been unique. No one else had chosen a human subject for a simulation of affection. The other students treated her with polite curiosity, but also distance, as if she had crossed some invisible line. Inside the review chamber, the Council of Emotive Sciences waited. They were tall, graceful beings, their faces expressionless and their eyes pale like frost. The lead examiner gestured for Lyra to step forward. "Your data, student Lyra, begin your presentation." Her voice was steady at first. She explained her process, how she observed human expressions, shared daily experiences, and recorded physiological changes. But when they asked her to describe the emotional impact, her words began to falter. "My subject, Ethan Wells, responded with consistent warmth and understanding," she said carefully. "He displayed genuine care. In response, I observed similar patterns in myself." "Observed?" one examiner repeated. "You mean experienced?" Lyra hesitated. "Yes, experienced." A murmur moved through the room. The lead examiner leaned forward. "Explain." She took a deep breath. "When he laughed, I felt lighter. When he was in pain, I felt distress. These sensations interfered with my logic. I could not maintain full emotional separation." The examiner's expression hardened. "Then you failed, Lyra. The objective was control, not contamination. You allowed emotional resonance to override analysis." The words struck her like cold water. "Failed?" she whispered. "But empathy requires connection. How else can we understand another being?" "Understanding does not require affection," the examiner said sharply. "Emotion clouds objectivity." "You lost focus," Lyra bowed her head. "Yes, instructor." She left the chamber in silence. Her steps felt heavier than ever. When she reached the dorm, Ethan was waiting. He saw her face and frowned. "Hey, what happened?" "They said I failed," she said quietly. "They believe I became too human." He blinked. "Too human? What does that even mean?" "It means I felt," she said softly. "It means my emotions broke their rules." Ethan stepped closer. "So feeling something real is a mistake now?" She looked up at him, her eyes uncertain. "To them, yes. To me, I do not know anymore," he smiled sadly. "You're not broken, Lyra. You just learned something they're afraid to admit." She turned away, her voice trembling. "But I was not supposed to feel this." "You were only part of the experiment," he laughed quietly. "Maybe we both got caught in the same experiment then." That made her look at him again. The light from the dome window touched his face and something in her chest stirred again, soft and painful all at once. "Ethan, when you speak kindly, my mind becomes quiet." "My heart." She stopped, pressing a hand to her chest. "It behaves strangely." He took a small step forward. "It's called caring, Lyra. That's what happens when you let someone in." Her eyes widened. "And what if I should not let anyone in?" "Then you'll never know what makes being alive worth it." The words hung in the air like a truth she didn't want but couldn't deny. She looked down, unsure what to say. The silence between them was filled with more emotion than words could hold. Later that night, she stood by the window again, staring at the endless stars. Ethan sat nearby, fixing a small drone that refused to fly straight. He glanced up and saw her reflection in the glass, still graceful and lost in thought. "You're thinking again," he said softly. "Yes," she whispered. "About what it means to feel. My people think emotion makes us weak, but you, humans, you build your whole world around it." He smiled. "That's because emotion gives everything meaning." "Meaning?" she repeated. "Perhaps that is what we have lost." The wind simulation outside shifted, scattering faint silver leaves across the view. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Lyra turned to him. "Ethan, if emotion is meaning, then what is love?" He looked at her, surprised by the question. "It's when someone becomes a part of you," he said quietly. "Their happiness matters as much as your own. It's not logical, but it's real." She stared at him for a long time, her hand lifted slightly, almost reaching toward him, then stopped midair. "That is dangerous," she said finally. "Maybe," he said with a smile, "but sometimes the best things are." For the first time she smiled back, small, uncertain, but real, and though neither of them said it aloud, both knew something had changed forever. The experiment had ended, but the feelings it awakened were just beginning. The next morning, Lyra did not come out of her room. Ethan noticed her absence right away. Her side of the dorm was perfectly neat, her tablet stacked on the desk and her chair pushed in with precision. Only one thing was out of place, a folded piece of paper on his table. Ethan picked it up slowly. It was written in her perfect, careful handwriting. "They are transferring me to the Alrene embassy for evaluation. Thank you for teaching me warmth." He sat down, reading the short message again and again. His chest tightened. He had known this day might come. After all, Lyra had broken her people's rules. But he had hoped, foolishly, that they would understand, that they would see her heart the way he did. Later that day, he went to the administrative dome to speak with the Academy Council. The tall glass doors opened with a soft hiss. Inside, he saw officials in long robes speaking in calm, emotionless tones. When he mentioned Lyra's name, their faces turned cold. "The Alrene government has requested her return," one of them said. "Her experiment was compromised by emotional contamination." "Contamination?" Ethan repeated. "You mean she cared?" The man looked at him with a hint of pity. "Humans misunderstand discipline. The Alrene believe emotions weaken rational thought. They will correct her behavior." Ethan clenched his fists.
"She doesn't need correction."
"She needs understanding." But the official only said, "It is not your place to interfere." Ethan left the dome, anger and helplessness swirling in his chest. He couldn't just do nothing. She had changed because of him, because she had let herself feel, and now she was being punished for it. He went back to their dorm and sat on her empty bed, remembering her soft voice, her curious questions, the way she had said "friend" for the first time as if it were a fragile treasure. Meanwhile, Lyra sat alone inside a quiet transport pod heading toward the embassy. The stars moved past the windows like silver dust. Her hands were clasped tightly together in her lap. Across from her sat two Alrene officials, their faces calm and distant. "Your report shows emotional instability," one said. "Did you form personal attachment with your subject?" Lyra hesitated. "I experience resonance." "That is not the question." She looked down. "Yes, I formed attachment." The two officials exchanged a glance. "Unacceptable. Your purpose was to study humans, not to become one. You will undergo recalibration therapy." Lyra didn't answer. Her eyes remained fixed on the stars outside. They looked endless, beautiful, and painfully far away. When they arrived at the embassy, she was led into a quiet room filled with pale light. The walls pulsed softly like living skin. A single machine stood in the center, cold and silent. "This device will restore your emotional balance," the technician said. "You will not feel discomfort," she nodded faintly. But just as she was about to step forward, a sound echoed through the hall, a voice calling her name. "Lyra," she turned. Ethan stood at the doorway, breathless, his clothes messy, eyes determined. The guards blocked his way, but he didn't stop. "Let me talk to her," he demanded. The official frowned. "This is an Alrene matter. Leave, human." But Lyra's voice broke through. "Wait," everyone froze. She stepped forward, her heart racing. "He is my subject," she said quickly. "If understanding is my failure, then he deserves to witness the result." The officials hesitated but finally stepped aside. Ethan walked toward her slowly, his face a mix of anger and worry. "Lyra, what are they doing to you?" "They will remove the emotions that interfere with my logic," she said softly. "I will not feel again. It will be easier." He shook his head. "No, it won't, Lyra. You're not broken. You're alive. You learned what it means to care, to love. Don't let them take that away." Her lips trembled. "It hurts, Ethan. Emotions hurt. They make me weak." He stepped closer. "They make you strong. You just don't see it yet. You cared enough to protect me, to comfort me, to smile when you didn't have to. That's not weakness, that's courage." Her silver eyes filled with something he had never seen before. Real tears. They shimmered as they fell down her pale cheeks. "Ethan," she whispered, "what is happening to me?" He reached out slowly, his voice gentle. "You're feeling love, Lyra. That's what's happening." The officials murmured in disapproval. Enough. Emotional interference must end. But before they could move, the machine lights flickered. Lyra turned to them, her voice suddenly clear. "No, I will not erase what I have learned." Her defiance stunned everyone in the room. The officials stared in silence as she stepped away from the machine. "You said emotion clouds judgment," she continued, her voice trembling but strong. "Yet it was emotion that helped me understand compassion, loyalty, trust. Without it, your research is meaningless." The lead official frowned. "You risk exile from your people." "Then I will accept it," she said softly. Ethan's heart pounded as he watched her stand there, fragile yet unshaken. The guards tried to move forward, but the embassy supervisor raised a hand. "Stop. Let her speak." For a long moment the room was silent except for the faint hum of the lights. Lyra looked at Ethan and something unspoken passed between them. Gratitude, fear, hope. Finally the supervisor sighed. "Perhaps we have misunderstood the balance between emotion and logic," he said slowly. "Lyra, you will not be punished, but your case will be reviewed. Until then, you are confined to observation." Ethan wanted to protest, but Lyra placed a hand on his arm. "It's all right," she whispered. "You came for me. That is enough." As they escorted her away, she looked back at him one last time. He didn't speak. He only nodded, silently promising he wouldn't give up. That night, Ethan returned to their empty dorm. The blue light from the window cast long shadows on the floor. He sat by her desk where her notes were still open and whispered to himself, "If they think love is weakness, then I'll show them what strength really means." He didn't know how yet, but he was sure of one thing. He wouldn't let her face the test of love alone. The days after the test felt unreal to Lyra. The council no longer looked at her like a failure. The report spreading across the academy called her discovery a breakthrough in emotional science. But none of that mattered to her. What mattered was that Ethan was safe and that she could still feel. Every time she looked at him, every time he smiled at her, she was reminded that she had chosen her own heart over fear. They were allowed to return to their shared dormitory, though it felt different now. The air no longer carried the silence of study. It felt alive. Ethan had fixed the small table lamp that flickered every night, and Lyra had placed a new crystal sphere beside it. The soft hum of her planet's harmonic light filled the room with a calm glow. One evening, Ethan leaned against the window, watching the ships move through the night sky. "So," he said with a grin, "how does it feel to be famous?" Lyra looked up from her tablet. "Confusing," she said softly. "They now treat me as if I am special, but all I did was feel." "That's what makes it special," Ethan replied. "You proved something they didn't believe was possible." She studied his face quietly. "You were part of that proof," she said. "Without you, I would still be empty." Ethan smiled. "Maybe, but you were always capable of feeling, Lyra. You just needed someone to remind you that it was okay." She looked at him for a long moment before saying, "Humans are strange. You create meaning out of small things, a smile, a touch, a memory, and yet somehow those small things hold entire worlds." He laughed softly. "Yeah, that's about right. It's messy, but it's beautiful." Their days became simpler after that. Lyra returned to teaching at the Cultural Exchange Center, where she guided both humans and aliens on how to communicate beyond language. Her lessons were gentle and full of warmth. She used her own story as an example of how connection could change everything. During one class, a young student asked, "Instructor Lyra, how can we know if our emotions are real or just imitation?" Lyra smiled. "If they make you kinder, they are real." After class, she often found Ethan waiting by the door holding 2 cups of tea, one human, one Alrine. They would walk together through the glowing gardens of the academy, talking about the day, laughing quietly. The world outside had started to change too. The Alrine scientist had begun studying emotions not as a flaw but as an evolution. Slowly, they were learning to see value in feeling. One night, while they sat under the stars near the dome's edge, Ethan said, "You know, when I joined this program, I thought I was just going to learn about alien technology. I never expected to fall into a love experiment." Lyra tilted her head. And did you enjoy the experiment? He smiled. It's my favorite one. She laughed softly, a sound that was once rare for her. You still use humor even in serious matters. It keeps things light, he said. Besides, laughter is just another kind of love. She looked at him, her silver eyes gentle. Then perhaps I am learning well. For a while they sat in silence, watching the stars shimmer above them. The academy lights dimmed in the distance, leaving only the glow of the dome and the soft hum of the night. Lyra's hand rested near his, and for a moment their fingers touched. Neither pulled away. Ethan, she said quietly, on my world we used to believe that love was chaos, that it broke reason and order. But now I think love is the order that makes chaos meaningful. He looked at her with quiet admiration. That's beautiful, Lyra. You're becoming more human every day. She smiled faintly. Or maybe you are becoming a little Alreen, he chuckled. Maybe that's the best kind of mix. The following week, the Galactic Council invited both of them to speak at a conference. They stood before hundreds of beings from different worlds. Cameras floated in the air, recording every word. When Lyra stepped forward to speak, her voice was calm but full of emotion. I once believed empathy was weakness, she began. That caring for another being made one lose clarity. But I was wrong. Emotion does not destroy reason, it gives it purpose. Without compassion, intelligence is only noise, and love is the bridge that can turn strangers into family. The crowd remained silent for a heartbeat. Then applause echoed through the hall, soft at first, then growing louder until it filled the entire dome. Ethan stood behind her, clapping with pride, his eyes warm. After the event, as they walked back through the quiet corridors, Ethan said, You were amazing up there. I think you changed some hearts today. Lyra turned to him with a small smile. Only because one human changed mine first. He blushed slightly but laughed. You're getting good at saying things like that, you know? I have a good teacher, she replied. When they reached their dorm, the night outside was peaceful. Lyra placed her crystal sphere on the table, and it glowed faintly, responding to the rhythm of their heartbeats. She looked at Ethan and said softly, Do you remember the first day we met? You smiled at me and I asked why. I remember, he said. You said it was illogical. Yes, she replied. Now I understand. Smiling is not logic, it is hope. Ethan looked at her with quiet affection. And what do you hope for now? She hesitated, then whispered, That this connection never ends. He reached out, gently taking her hand. Then let's make sure it doesn't. The crystal sphere pulsed brighter, filling the room with soft light. Outside, the stars seemed to lean closer to listen. 2 worlds, 2 hearts, and one discovery that had changed both forever. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by the hum of life and light, the alien who once could not feel and the human who taught her how to love finally understood. The test of love was never meant to end. It was meant to begin.